Marcus Thompson adjusted his expensive watch and straightened his designer tie as he stepped out of his black BMW in front of Buckingham Palace. The 42-year-old investment banker had flown in from New York specifically for this London business trip, and he wasn't about to let anyone or anything delay his important meeting with potential investors. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as tourists began gathering along the barriers. Marcus barely glanced at the growing crowd, his mind focused entirely on the presentation he would deliver in 30 minutes. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his assistant, reminders about his packed schedule, and updates from his trading team back in Manhattan. "Excuse me, sir, but you'll need to wait here." A polite voice called out as Marcus approached the main entrance area. A palace security guard gestured toward the designated tourist path, but Marcus waved him off dismissively. "I'm not a tourist," Marcus replied curtly, not bothering to slow his stride. "I have a business appointment." The security guard tried to explain that certain areas would be temporarily restricted due to the changing of the guard ceremony, but Marcus had already pulled out his phone, speaking loudly to his assistant about quarterly projections and market volatility. He had built his reputation on never being late, never backing down, and certainly never letting protocol interfere with profit. As he walked, Marcus noticed other pedestrians beginning to step aside and gather along the edges of the courtyard. Some held cameras, others checked their watches expectantly. A family with young children hurried past him toward the barriers, the father explaining excitedly about the ceremony they were about to witness. "Dad, will we really see the Queen's guards?" asked a little girl with pigtails tugging on her father's sleeve. "Better than that," the father replied with a smile. "We'll see the whole ceremony. It's been a tradition for centuries." Marcus rolled his eyes at the commotion. Tourists and their trivial fascinations always baffled him. Time was money, and he had no intention of wasting either on outdated pageantry. His meeting was scheduled for 9:30 sharp, and the palace entrance was just ahead. Whatever ceremony these people were waiting for could hardly be important enough to disrupt serious business. The morning air carried the distant sound of military drums, growing steadily louder. Palace staff began directing visitors more urgently toward the designated viewing areas, their voices becoming more insistent. Marcus ignored them all, his leather shoes clicking confidently against the pavement as he maintained his determined pace toward his destination. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he muttered into his phone. "Helen, reschedule the Tokyo conference call for this afternoon. These people have no sense of priority whatsoever." A tourist standing nearby overheard and looked at him strangely. "Sir, you might want to move to the side. The guards will be coming through any moment." Marcus didn't even acknowledge the warning. In his world, people moved aside for him, not the other way around. He had closed million-dollar deals while others hesitated, had bought and sold companies while competitors deliberated. A few palace guards in costume weren't about to change his trajectory. The drumming grew louder, accompanied now by the distinctive sound of military marching. The crowd's excitement became palpable, with cameras appearing and children being lifted onto shoulders for better views. Palace officials made final announcements about staying behind the barriers and keeping the ceremonial route clear. Marcus checked his watch again and quickened his pace. He could see his destination clearly now, just across the ceremonial courtyard. The most direct route would save him valuable minutes, and in his experience, confidence and determination always won out over arbitrary rules and regulations. Behind him, the sound of synchronized footsteps grew closer, but Marcus remained focused on his goal. He had navigated Wall Street trading floors during market crashes, had stared down corporate boards and hostile takeovers. Whatever quaint British tradition was about to unfold around him seemed utterly insignificant compared to the serious business at hand. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the palace grounds as two very different worlds were about to collide in spectacular fashion. The distinctive sound of military precision filled the morning air as the Queen's Guard emerged from the palace barracks. 24 soldiers moved as one unit, their scarlet tunics brilliant in the sunlight, their iconic black bearskin hats adding an imposing 8 inches to their already impressive height. Each step was perfectly synchronized, each movement a testament to months of rigorous training and centuries of unwavering tradition. Leading the formation was Sergeant James Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the Welsh Guards. At 28, He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for the prestigious ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. His weathered face remained stoically expressionless beneath the bearskin hat, but his sharp eyes constantly surveyed the route ahead, trained to identify any potential disruptions to the sacred ceremony. The changing of the guard was more than mere pageantry to these soldiers. It represented an unbroken chain of duty stretching back over 350 years, a living symbol of the monarchy's endurance and the military's unwavering loyalty. Every step, every turn, every movement had been rehearsed countless times until it became second nature, muscle memory honed to perfection. Tourist cameras flashed frantically as the formation approached the main courtyard. The crowd pressed against the barriers, children pointing excitedly at the magnificent spectacle unfolding before them. Elderly visitors dabbed at their eyes, moved by the stirring display of British tradition, while younger spectators captured every moment on their smartphones. "Look at them march," whispered an elderly woman to her companion. "My grandfather served in the Guards during the war. He would have been so proud to see this." The drums maintained their steady rhythm, accompanied by the haunting melody of fifes that seemed to echo off the palace walls themselves. Each note carried the weight of history, connecting the present moment to countless generations of soldiers who had performed this same sacred duty before kings and queens. Through wars and peace, triumph and tragedy, Sergeant Mitchell's trained eyes swept the courtyard automatically, noting the positions of palace security, the location of the barriers, the excited faces of the gathered crowd. Everything appeared normal, exactly as it should be during the ceremony that had become one of London's most famous attractions. But something was wrong. In his peripheral vision, Mitchell caught sight of movement where there should be none. A figure in an expensive suit was walking directly across the ceremonial route, completely oblivious to the approaching formation. The man appeared to be talking on a phone, gesturing animatedly, his body language radiating the kind of self-importance that Mitchell had encountered before among certain types of civilians. The sergeant's training kicked in immediately. During ceremonial duties, the Queen's Guard had strict protocols to follow. They were not to break formation under any circumstances, not to acknowledge disruptions, and absolutely not to deviate from their prescribed route. The ceremony was sacred, inviolable, a commitment to duty that transcended individual comfort or convenience. Behind Mitchell, the other guards maintained their perfect synchronization, unaware of the developing situation. Their eyes remained fixed straight ahead, their expressions unchanged, their steps unwavering. They had been drilled to continue their duties regardless of weather, crowds, or unexpected obstacles. The gap between the marching guards and the oblivious businessman continued to narrow. Palace security had noticed the potential problem, but they were positioned too far away to intervene quickly enough. The ceremony's momentum carried the formation forward at their prescribed pace, while Marcus Thompson continued his determined march across their path, completely absorbed in his phone conversation. Tourists began to notice the impending collision. Some pointed and whispered urgently to their companions, while others raised their cameras higher, sensing that they might be about to witness something extraordinary. A few called out warnings, but their voices were lost in the ceremonial music and the general excitement of the crowd. The morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the courtyard as two unstoppable forces approached their inevitable meeting point. On one side, centuries of military tradition and unwavering discipline. On the other, modern arrogance and complete disregard for anything beyond personal agenda. Neither side showed any sign of yielding. Marcus Thompson remained completely absorbed in his phone conversation, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he discussed complex financial derivatives with his assistant back in New York. The irony was lost on him that while he spoke about market volatility and unpredictable variables, he was about to become the most unpredictable variable in one of Britain's most predictable traditions. "Helen, I need those Tokyo numbers before the presentation," he said, waving his free hand dismissively at a palace employee who was trying to get his attention. "I don't care if it's 3 a.m. there. Wake someone up." The sound of marching boots grew steadily louder, but Marcus had spent his entire career blocking out distractions. Trading floors were notoriously noisy environments, and he had developed an almost supernatural ability to focus on what mattered to him while ignoring everything else. Unfortunately, what mattered to him at that moment was quarterly profit margins, not British military tradition. A young mother standing at the barriers watched in growing alarm as the two forces approached each other. She bounced her toddler nervously, whispering to her husband, "He's going to walk right into them. Should we shout a warning?" Her husband shook his head grimly. "Look at him. He wouldn't listen anyway. Some people think the world revolves around them." Indeed, Marcus embodied a particular type of modern arrogance that had served him well in boardrooms and trading floors, but was spectacularly inappropriate for his current situation. He had built his fortune on the belief that aggression and determination could overcome any obstacle, that rules were suggestions for other people, and that his time was inherently more valuable than anyone else's. The Queen's Guard continued their approach with mathematical precision. Sergeant Mitchell could now clearly see the businessman's face, noting the expensive watch, the perfectly tailored suit, the confident stride that suggested someone accustomed to having others step aside. But Mitchell had sworn an oath to Queen and country, had trained for months to perform this ceremony flawlessly, and had no intention of breaking formation for anyone's convenience. Behind the sergeant, Guardsman Thompson, no relation to the businessman despite sharing a surname, felt a bead of sweat form beneath his bearskin hat. He had only been performing ceremonial duties for 6 months, and this was his first potential disruption. His training told him to maintain formation no matter what, but his natural human instincts urged him to somehow avoid the impending collision. The drums continued their steady beat, each strike seeming to count down the seconds until impact. The crowd's murmur grew more anxious as people realized they were about to witness either a last-second miracle or a spectacular clash between old-world discipline and new-world entitlement. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, but only to check his watch again. 23 minutes until his meeting. He was cutting it close, but he would make it if he maintained his current pace across the courtyard. The growing noise around him registered only as typical tourist commotion, the kind of background disturbance he had learned to tune out during his years of high-stakes business dealings. "The London markets are looking volatile," he continued into his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to create some volatility of his own. "I want to short the pound after this meeting concludes." A palace security guard made one final desperate attempt to intercept Marcus, breaking into a run from his position near the main entrance. But the distance was too great, the timing too precise, and Marcus's determination too absolute. The businessman's expensive shoes continued their confident click against the pavement, carrying him directly into the path of Britain's most famous military tradition. The gap closed to mere yards as hundreds of tourists held their breath, cameras ready, sensing they were about to witness something that would be talked about and shared around the world within hours. The morning sun seemed to pause in its climb, as two very different philosophies of life prepared to meet head-on in spectacular fashion. The collision was both inevitable and shocking in its sudden violence. Marcus Thompson, still gesturing animatedly during his phone conversation, walked directly into Sergeant Mitchell's path just as the formation reached the center of the courtyard. The impact was immediate and decisive. Sergeant Mitchell, trained never to break formation or acknowledge disruptions, maintained his march with mechanical precision. His 6'2" frame, strengthened by years of military training and weighted down by the ceremonial uniform, struck Marcus with the force of a moving wall. The businessman never saw it coming. Marcus went down hard, his expensive phone flying from his hand and clattering across the stone pavement. His briefcase burst open, scattering important documents across the courtyard as a gust of morning wind caught the papers and sent them dancing through the air like confetti. His perfectly pressed suit jacket tore at the shoulder, and his designer tie ended up wrapped around his head in a way that would have been comical, if not for the genuine shock on his face. The crowd gasped collectively, the sound rippling through the hundreds of gathered tourists like a wave. Cameras clicked frantically as people captured the moment when entitled arrogance met immovable tradition. Children pointed in amazement while their parents tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Did that really just happen?" whispered a teenager to her friend, both of them staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before them. "The guard just walked right through him," her friend replied, already uploading the video to social media with shaking hands. Sergeant Mitchell continued marching without missing a single step. His expression unchanged, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if nothing had occurred. Behind him, the other 23 guards maintained perfect formation, stepping around Marcus's fallen form with the same mechanical precision they would use to navigate any other obstacle in their path. This was perhaps the most stunning aspect of the entire incident. The Queen's Guard didn't pause, didn't break rank, didn't acknowledge the disruption in any way. They simply continued their sacred duty exactly as they had been trained to do, treating the fallen businessman as they would a puddle to be avoided or a piece of debris to be circumnavigated. Marcus lay on the cold stone for several seconds, completely stunned. His world had just been turned upside down in the most literal sense possible. For a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful executives, to having assistants anticipate his every need, to moving through life with the confidence that his importance would be recognized and accommodated, the experience was profoundly disorienting. "What the hell just happened?" he gasped, struggling to sit up as his scattered papers continued to blow around the courtyard. His expensive watch had been scratched, his suit was torn, and his dignity was in tatters. Palace security finally reached him, but their primary concern was clearing the ceremonial route, rather than offering assistance. "Sir, you need to move away from the formation path immediately," one officer said firmly, helping Marcus to his feet while simultaneously gathering his scattered belongings. The irony was not lost on the watching crowd that Marcus was now being treated exactly like any other tourist who had wandered into a restricted area. His expensive suit and confident demeanor meant nothing to the palace staff, who were trained to deal with all types of disruptions to the ceremony. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus sputtered, brushing dust from his jacket while trying to reassemble his professional composure. But his voice cracked slightly, revealing the shock that lay beneath his attempted indignation. The security officer remained professional but unmoved. "Sir, this is a restricted area during the ceremony. You were warned multiple times to stay clear of the route." As Marcus was escorted toward the barriers with the other tourists, the full magnitude of his situation began to dawn on him. Hundreds of people had witnessed his humiliation. Many had recorded it, and he could already imagine the footage spreading across social media platforms around the world. The businessman who had thought himself above protocol had just learned a very public lesson about the power of tradition and the consequences of arrogance. The Queen's Guard completed their march across the courtyard with flawless precision, leaving Marcus to contemplate how spectacularly his morning had gone wrong. Within minutes of the collision, Marcus Thompson's humiliation began spreading across the internet at viral speed. The incident had been captured from multiple angles by dozens of tourists, each offering their own perspective on the spectacular clash between American arrogance and British tradition. Entitled, "Businessman Gets Reality Check from Queen's Guard," read one of the first posts to gain traction. The video showed the entire sequence in crystal clear detail. Marcus walking confidently across the courtyard while talking on his phone, the approaching guards maintaining perfect formation, and the inevitable collision that sent him sprawling across the stone pavement. Sarah Jenkins, a teacher from Manchester, who had been visiting London with her family, posted her footage with the caption, "This is what happens when you think you're more important than centuries of tradition." The guard didn't even break stride. Her video quickly accumulated thousands of views and hundreds of comments from people around the world, expressing everything from amusement to moral outrage. Meanwhile, Marcus sat on a bench outside the palace grounds, still trying to process what had happened to him. His torn suit jacket hung loosely from his shoulders. His scattered papers were now a soggy mess after being trampled by tourists, and his phone screen was cracked beyond repair. But perhaps most damaging of all was the realization that his important business meeting was now impossible to attend. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, attempting to call his assistant from a borrowed phone. "Helen, I need you to reschedule everything. There's been an incident." His assistant's voice crackled through the poor connection. "An incident? What kind of incident?" "The investors have been waiting for 20 minutes. Marcus struggled to find words that would adequately explain his situation without sounding completely ridiculous. How do you tell your assistant that you've been knocked down by a soldier in a funny hat because you refused to respect a tourist ceremony? How do you explain that your carefully planned business strategy had been derailed by your own arrogance? "I'll call you back," he said finally, ending the call before his assistant could ask more questions. Across the courtyard, the changing of the guard ceremony continued with flawless precision. The incident that had seemed so momentous to Marcus was merely a minor interruption in a tradition that had weathered far greater challenges. The guards performed their ancient ritual with the same dedication they had shown for centuries, their commitment unshaken by one man's entitled behavior. Sergeant Mitchell, still maintaining his position in the formation, allowed himself the slightest internal satisfaction. He had served in combat zones where split-second decisions meant life or death, where following orders without question was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. A businessman who couldn't be bothered to respect simple ceremonial protocol was hardly a significant challenge. The crowd that had witnessed the collision began to disperse, but many lingered to discuss what they had seen. The consensus was overwhelmingly clear. Marcus had gotten exactly what he deserved. Tourists who had traveled thousands of miles to witness British traditions were appalled by his casual disrespect, while locals shook their heads at another example of foreign arrogance. "Did you see his face when he hit the ground?" laughed a teenager, showing the video to her friends. "He looked like he couldn't believe what had happened to him." "Good," replied her father firmly. "Maybe he learned something about respecting other people's cultures." By noon, Yaker Guardgate was trending on multiple social media platforms. News outlets began picking up the story, with headlines ranging from "American businessman bowled over by British tradition" to "When entitlement meets the immovable object." The incident was being discussed on morning talk shows, analyzed by cultural commentators, and shared millions of times across various platforms. Marcus, meanwhile, had retreated to his hotel room, watching in horror as his humiliation became global entertainment. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, and friends who had seen the footage. His carefully cultivated professional image was crumbling in real time, reduced to a viral video that painted him as the epitome of ugly American behavior abroad. The irony was particularly bitter for a man who had built his career on controlling narratives and managing perceptions. In boardrooms, he was known for his ability to spin any situation to his advantage, to turn potential disasters into profitable opportunities. But there was no spinning this disaster, no way to reframe being knocked down by a guard for his own entitled behavior. The professional consequences of Marcus Thompson's viral humiliation began manifesting within hours of the incident. His phone, now repaired but constantly buzzing, brought a steady stream of increasingly uncomfortable conversations with colleagues, clients, and superiors who had seen the footage. "Marcus, what the hell were you thinking?" demanded Richard Sterling, the senior partner at his investment firm, during an emergency video call. Sterling's face filled the laptop screen, his expression a mixture of disbelief and barely controlled anger. "Do you have any idea how this makes our company look?" Marcus sat in his London hotel room, still wearing his torn suit because his spare clothing was back in New York. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now having the most important conversation of his career, while looking like he'd been in a street fight. "Richard, it was a misunderstanding," Marcus began, but his partner cut him off immediately. "A misunderstanding? Marcus, there are 12 different videos of you being knocked down by a British soldier because you were too arrogant to follow basic tourist guidelines. Our biggest client in London just called to express their concerns about our corporate culture." The conversation continued for another painful 20 minutes, with Marcus watching his career prospects diminish with each passing moment. The firm's reputation for professionalism and cultural sensitivity was being questioned because of his actions, and several major deals were now under review. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, Sergeant Mitchell was completing his shift with characteristic professionalism. The incident had barely registered in his daily routine, just another example of civilian behavior that reinforced his appreciation for military discipline and respect for tradition. "Bit of excitement during the ceremony today," commented Guardsman Thompson as they returned to the barracks. Mitchell nodded briefly. "Some people need to learn respect the hard way. Better a bruised ego than a complete lack of character." The sergeant had served in Afghanistan, where cultural insensitivity could have deadly consequences. He had seen too many examples of Western arrogance causing unnecessary problems in foreign environments. From his perspective, Marcus had received a gentle education in the importance of respecting local customs. Online, the story continued to evolve beyond simple entertainment. Cultural commentators began using the incident as a springboard for broader discussions about American behavior abroad, privilege, and the importance of respecting cultural traditions. Academic papers were already being planned about the collision between modern entitlement and historical ceremony. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a sociologist at Oxford University, was quoted in several news articles analyzing the incident. "This represents a perfect microcosm of contemporary cultural tensions," she explained to a BBC interviewer. "We see an individual who has been conditioned to believe that personal convenience trumps communal respect, encountering a tradition that has survived precisely because it refuses to accommodate individual preferences." Marcus found himself cast as the villain in countless think pieces and editorial columns. Op-ed writers used his behavior as evidence of everything wrong with modern business culture, American tourism, and privileged male behavior. The incident had transcended viral entertainment to become a cultural touchstone. His hotel room became a prison of sorts, with reporters camping outside and his every movement potentially subject to further scrutiny. The man who had always thrived on attention now desperately craved anonymity. But his 15 minutes of fame showed no signs of ending. "This will blow over," he told himself repeatedly, but deep down he knew that the internet had a long memory. His moment of arrogance would follow him indefinitely, a permanent reminder of the day his sense of superiority collided with immovable tradition. The investors he had flown to London to meet had already canceled their afternoon session and were reconsidering their entire relationship with his firm. The deal that had seemed so important just hours earlier now appeared to be the least of his problems. As evening approached, Marcus stared out his hotel window at the London streets below, watching ordinary people go about their daily lives with the kind of anonymity he now envied desperately. He had spent his entire career building a reputation, and it had taken less than 10 seconds to destroy it completely. 3 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus Thompson sat in a much smaller office than he was accustomed to, staring at a letter of resignation that would formally end his career at Sterling & Associates. The viral video had never stopped circulating, and the professional consequences had proven far more lasting than anyone had anticipated. "I'm sorry it came to this, Marcus," said Richard Sterling, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But the board feels that your continued association with the firm creates too much reputational risk. The London clients never recovered their confidence, and frankly, you've become a liability." Marcus nodded silently, having expected this outcome for weeks. The incident had cost the firm 3 major accounts and countless potential opportunities. Insurance companies were now using his behavior as an example in corporate training seminars about cultural sensitivity. Business schools had added the video to their curricula as a case study in professional ethics and international business protocol. The resignation came with a modest severance package, but nothing approaching the lifestyle Marcus had grown accustomed to during his years of success. His Manhattan apartment would have to be sold, his expensive cars returned to the leasing company, and his entire life recalibrated around dramatically reduced circumstances. But perhaps the most surprising development was that Marcus had begun to genuinely reflect on his behavior for the first time in years. The enforced isolation and professional exile had given him space to consider perspectives that his previous success had allowed him to ignore. He had received thousands of messages since the incident, ranging from mockery and condemnation to a surprising number of thoughtful critiques that forced him to examine his assumptions about privilege, respect, and cultural humility. One letter, from a retired British Army officer, had been particularly impactful. "Son," the letter read, "those guards you encountered have served their country with honor in some of the world's most dangerous places. They've earned the right to perform their ceremonial duties without interference from anyone, regardless of their personal importance. Perhaps this experience will teach you that true importance comes from service to something greater than yourself." The words had stung because they were undeniably true. Marcus had spent his entire adult life believing that financial success was the ultimate measure of worth, that his achievements gave him the right to expect deference from others. The collision with Sergeant Mitchell had shattered that worldview in the most public way possible. Meanwhile, Sergeant Mitchell continued his duties with the same professionalism he had always demonstrated. He remained largely unaware of the ongoing discussion his actions had sparked, focused instead on training new recruits and maintaining the standards that had defined his military career. The thing about tradition, he explained to a group of new guardsmen during a training session, is that it's bigger than any individual. Our job is to honor the commitment made by every soldier who came before us, regardless of what distractions or obstacles we encounter. The young soldiers nodded respectfully, understanding that they were inheriting a responsibility that transcended personal convenience or comfort. Several had already seen the viral video and understood exactly what kind of obstacles they might face from entitled civilians. Back in New York, Marcus had begun working as a financial consultant for smaller firms, his reduced circumstances forcing him to accept assignments he would have previously considered beneath his notice. The work was honest but humble, requiring him to listen more and demand less than he had during his previous career. His social circle had largely evaporated, with former colleagues and friends distancing themselves from the viral embarrassment he represented. But gradually he began forming new relationships with people who knew him only as the person he was becoming, not the person he had been. The incident at Buckingham Palace had ended one version of Marcus Thompson's life and forced the beginning of another. Whether this new version would prove better or worse remained to be seen, but it would certainly be more humble. The Queen's Guard continued their centuries-old tradition without interruption. Their commitment unshaken by viral fame or cultural commentary, their duty remained constant, a reminder that some things truly are more important than individual convenience, and that respect must sometimes be taught through consequence rather than request. In the end, the collision between entitlement and tradition had produced exactly what such encounters always do. The immovable object had remained immovable, while the unstoppable force discovered it wasn't actually unstoppable after all.